Welcome to Modern Farm Business Podcast. This podcast is designed to help the farm leader bring their business to the next level. We'll cover everything from leadership and finance to strategy and planning. I'm your host, Dean Hefta. The past couple of episodes, we've been talking about elements of the outstanding farm. And one of the things I've seen and found in farms that really stand out is they develop a real brand. So what's a brand? It used to be the profession of corporate branding was really reserved for Madison Avenue ad agencies and their Fortune 500 clients. Advertising budgets would be in the millions just to build brand awareness. Today, however, the concept, the understanding, and the practice of branding has moved from Madison Avenue to really the everyday person. A mom and pop corner shop is focused on their brand message. Hobbyists even have a name and promote themselves online. Shows like Shark Tank have given the masses a view into being able to judge a business's message. So what does all this mean for the farm? Well, interestingly, the concept of branding has a fairly agricultural history. So diving into history a little bit here, the word brand actually comes from the ancient Norse meaning to burn. And in the 1500s, people started burning their mark into cattle to show ownership, what we now refer to as branding, branding the cattle. The rest, you could say, is history in the concept of the corporation coming to be in the Industrial Revolution, bringing goods and services and brands as we know them today. The farm, though, for much of history, focused really on the traditional idea of marking ownership rather than marketing the business. This is really because of the commodity nature of the business and, for lack of a better phrase, the fact that in farming, often we're considered price takers. The position that we're in the business is really just taking price for the commodities that we're producing. So you could say from a promotional position, most farms really didn't have that much need for actual branding. Today, though, with the rise of social media, the need for more emotional connections with landlords in our community or even society at large, the farm now has a case for really addressing their brand. Now, when we think about our brand, we can pretty easily think about just a logo, perhaps. Or maybe we go into the local sign company and have them put a bunch of stickers together with our name on it so we can put it on our trucks, and that pretty much becomes our branding. Now, I just mentioned the emotional connection people have with our business, and that's what really branding is about. The story people tell themselves about our brand. Think about the story that you tell yourself when I list the following brands: Harley-Davidson, Apple, UPS, Lego, Enron. Each of these names conjures up a different image, a different story, a different emotion. Now, we associate brands with logos, but they're really separate things. The logo is the representation of a brand. Since the brand is our story, let's dig into what makes a great story. Stories are important because logic just isn't enough for others to understand who we are. Facts can't do the work that stories do, and because we're humans, we believe our decisions are made from fact, but in reality, it's the emotion that makes the difference. You really don't have to look further than political debates, or maybe a conversation about non-GMO versus GMO. Any number of things that we face are really more emotionally driven than fact-driven. Here's an example. You meet somebody in town and then they ask you to tell them about your farm. You clearly state, oh yes, I've been farming for the last 22 years. We raise corn and soybeans on 3,200 acres. Now in that answer, which is perhaps an accurate answer, you've shared the facts, but you've left that person to fill in the story and apply their meaning to those facts. You know what? A lot of us in farming are really fact-oriented people. We talk about timelines, we talk about numbers. But the problem is I haven't shared the why. I didn't share what makes us different, what I'm excited about, what's important for them to know about or what they should be excited about. So building and sharing an effective story means I need to be able to step into the shoes of the person I'm talking with and focus on how I want them to feel and what they need to understand. It really takes empathy on my part to see what's going on from their perspective. Here's another thing about stories. Stories spread, but facts don't. Stories do a much better job of getting the story out beyond us, beyond that interaction. So let's go back to our story of sharing about our farm to somebody in town. And they say, "Tell me about your farm." You know, I'm blessed to be the fifth generation farmer on our farm. I rented my first piece of ground when I was just 17 years old. And today, between my wife and me and my brother's family, we farm about 3,200 acres. We raise corn and soybeans, and in fact, some of the corn we raise goes into tortilla production. Our corn last year that we raised for tortillas made almost 5 million of them. Two of the biggest priorities on our farm is really productivity and conservation. The most important resource we have is our land, and so we work really hard to leave it better than we found it. And thanks to technology, we've been able to increase our soil health, reduce erosion, and double our productivity in just the last 20 years. Doesn't that do a better job of leaving them understanding things that I want them to understand and perceive about our operation? I'm still sharing the facts, but isn't there a lot more connection, a lot more emotion there? It gets them more excited about what we're doing. And it's the truth. That's the key. Your story needs to be the truth. And if you really want to work on your story, one of the best resources I've found out there, if you're serious about it, is actually a book by Annette Simmons called The Story Factor. She goes into really breaking down great stories, and what she talks about is there's 6 different types of stories. One is the who I am story. That's about building credibility. It's telling people and sharing the story about who I am as a person and, why am I credible? The second is called the why I'm here story. This really lays out with transparency. This type of a story tells us, this is why I'm here. This is what I'm hoping to gain. This is what I'm hoping to accomplish. And so through that transparency, we begin to develop more trust because they don't perceive we have some sort of hidden agenda. The third is the vision story. This is the future that we're seeking to create. This is the better future. And it really then powers us to overcome the struggle. It's the why. It's the energy for getting through the tough times. The fourth story is called a teaching story. These are, you could consider parables and allegories and things like that, these teaching stories that move beyond just teaching somebody a skill of how to get in and out of equipment, but more the consequence of not doing it right and maybe telling a story of somebody that was hurt and the consequence of not following these types of skills. So you're teaching through story. The fifth is what she calls values and action stories. These are not just saying we value honesty. It is having a story that illustrates and gives context to this is how we see honesty playing out in our business. And here's an example. So you're telling a story to illustrate the value. And the final one she elaborates on is a story she calls I know what you're thinking stories. And so in your conversation, in your story, you're naming their concern. And by doing that, it illustrates the empathy that you have and it reduces their anxiety. I know what you're thinking. So being able to articulate our own story to ourselves first helps to create that foundation for building our brand. Okay, so when we're building our brand and we've worked through these stories and we're telling ourselves these stories, I need to know, do I know who I am? Do I know who our farm is? Can I explain why we're here and what we're working to create and the things that we value? You see how those stories begin to build that foundation for our brand. And when you get those stories laid out, it becomes your roadmap for infusing into that brand. So let's move now back into branding. I mentioned that The logo is one of the components of branding, but it's just one. It's a very visual and tangible piece. But the brand is really what you're known for in your community, however you define community. I mean, with social media, community has become much bigger than just the people within 10 miles of my place. That brand becomes this emotional residue that I leave behind with the people I interact with, the people I do business with, the people that drive by the farm, the people that I know from being online. So we can even, for a moment, to understand branding, take ourselves out of the equation. We can get in the truck and we go drive around. Drive past the farms that you know well, drive past the farms that maybe you only kind of know, and you will begin to experience these different emotions and thoughts about how you perceive their brand. And sometimes it's easier to think about others than ourselves. You know, one farm might be known for their tidiness. Every field is perfect. Nothing is ever out of place on the farm. The trucks are spotless. This is an example of how the business, the thing that we see in the business, becomes an extension of the founder, of the leader, of the person in charge. And that then filters into the brand of the farm, what they're known for. You know, another farm might be known for how generous they are in the community with their time and money and resources. Maybe they take people in that need a second chance and get them some work experience. You know, maybe the place isn't spotless, but people remark about their generosity. I think the word remark is a good one. It leads us to really ask ourselves questions about our own brand. What is currently what we are and what we want to be? What is it that is remarkable? What's worthy of remark about our farm? How do others view us? Our neighbors, our landlords, our suppliers? How do we want to be viewed? Are those things different? And if so, what are the things that we need to focus on to change in order to create the brand that we desire? See, the brand isn't something you just hire an agency to put out there for the world. It's really the understanding that others have of who you are. It's their perceptions. And you can put on a professional front, but that doesn't last. Eventually, the brand aligns with who you truly are. Enron, for example, that was one of the companies that I listed. They spent millions on their image, and for a long time, they were viewed in industry as an innovator, somebody to hold up and look up to. But eventually, the true brand emerges. The brand finally became aligned with the business and the sham that it really was. So once we have our understanding of our story, of who we are and who we're working to become, what are some of the avenues for building our formal brand? Well, I think of it as two key elements: identifying the audience and then identifying the channel. So maybe my audience is landlords and potential employees. If so, I need to first put myself in their shoes. What are they looking for in a farm? What do they need to know? What do I want them to know? How should they feel about our operation? Then you can look at the channels, or call them the avenues, for them to experience my story. So some of the ways that people might interact with my brand, it could be the condition of my farmyard. Is it tidy and painted and mowed, or is it really junky and dilapidated? Maybe the attention to the equipment. I have mud flaps missing on the truck. Paint is faded on the equipment. Maybe it's our people. Are they kind of rude and inconsiderate? Are they continually disheveled and dirty? Who are they? Because they are an avenue of our brand. Maybe it's our fields. We farm 30 miles away. Are they unmowed and unkept and weedy? Do we wait for several weeks after everybody else is done to take ours out? What are those pieces? Now, I'm not saying that any of these things should be a certain way. What I'm saying is you should be intentional about these pieces, as they are a part of your brand and they should be consistent with your brand. Some other tools we can use. So, for example, we can develop a website. Do I need one? Do I have one? You could hire a local person to put together a simple one. You could make your own. You could use a site like Wix.com and create your own. How do I make it as simple but as professional as possible? Too often I see people starting out really ambitious with big hopes for how complex and elaborate it's going to be. 2 years later, it's been completely neglected. And that actually makes the farm worse because they can see you haven't touched this thing for 2 years. You must not care about it. Social media. Is there a fit? Do I need Facebook? Do I need Twitter? Is it going to help my audience? Is it going to help my message? Am I willing to commit to what it's going to take? Because I don't want to start something if I'm not going to stick with it. I shouldn't do it if other people are doing it. That's not a good enough reason. Anything in branding, if my neighbor says, oh, here's what I'm doing, that by itself is not a good enough reason. It has to fit into my audience and my message. Does it support that? Will I commit to it? My logo. Today it's easier than ever to professionalize your farm brand with very little money. If you want a simple custom logo, you can go to sites like 99 Designs or Hatchwise to have designers from all over submit design ideas for just a few $100. Now, a quick word on logo design, and this could be its own episode in itself. Keep it simple, keep it clean. If you're going to put it on trucks or a hat or a sign by the road, it needs to be easy to read. Fancy does not mean better. Take a lesson from Apple. Steve Jobs said that their logo that they used until the mid-90s was probably the most expensive logo they could have ever come up with because it used 6 different colors. And he wasn't saying that as a compliment. They ended up changing it to the current logo because what happened was every time they went to print something, it meant you got to use 6 colors, which makes everything more expensive. Today, you'll notice it's a simple one-color silhouette of an apple. You can see it in your mind right now. I advise logos that are not more than 2 colors and that will work well in a single color so you can use them in embroidery easily. What else could you do? You can create a brochure that tells your story that's very simple that you can use with landlords or prospective employees. Again, go back to your audience. What do they need and what are some simple ways of getting your story to them? My encouragement is still know who your audience is and don't do things because other people are doing it. Do it because it serves your audience and your purpose. So a quick recap. Figure out your story. What makes your farm different? What do others need to know? What's going to really stick with them? Next, get clear on what your brand is and how are we perceived today. You might need to do a little research, a little reconnaissance to find out how are we perceived. Next, decide on what you want your brand to be. This doesn't mean a fancy sign. It might mean you need to change some of the elements of how you actually do business because that ties into your brand. And determine who is your audience that you want to focus your messaging on. Who is this brand for? And finally, pick a couple of key channels or avenues that you really want to do well in getting your message, your story, to that audience. Thanks for joining me this week. As always, if you have thoughts, questions on topics like these, shoot me an email at dean@modernfarmbusiness.com. Next week, we'll be moving into our series on communication skills, and joining me will be Joseph Grinney, the New York Times best-selling co-author of such books as Crucial Conversations and Influencer. You won't want to miss it. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe where you get podcasts, leave us a review, and tell a friend about Modern Farm Business Podcast. Thanks.